All right, so welcome to the program. Today we're going to be taking a bit of a fun deck through a league. This is a project I've been working on for a little bit. It's got some interesting things, but the core of this deck, a deck that I'm calling Sailor of Mean, because it's fun. But the core of the deck is using Direfleet Hoarder. Direfleet Hoarder and Sailor of Means to ramp us a little bit into like an Hour of Promise faster than we should normally have it, and the Scarab God. And we're going to use Hour of Promise to get us ahead on lands, but ahead on lands in order to activate the Scarab God, but also to get some of our tech lands that are in the format. And the three that I'm playing right now are Arch of Orazca, Scavenger Grounds, and Ifnir Deadlands. All three of these are useful effects that we can get with Hour of Promise, and the most important one is Arch of Orazca. It's a way for us to basically not use a card at all, since it's still a land that taps for mana, in order to draw additional cards if we flood out. And this deck is, in a way, kind of designed to flood out. So that is fine to have a mana sink like that. The other mana sink is obviously the Scarab God, probably the best mana, the best mana sink in the standard format. Probably one of the best ones that we've seen in a while. Second maybe to Hazoret, just depending on the metagame at the time. Right now I think you probably want to be on a Scarab God, the Scarab God end of the meta, but we'll see. Other than that, we've got I guess I'll talk about just a couple of some of the cards. So Champion of Wits is a way for us to bridge from 3 mana up to the lands that we'll need to get to 5 mana to play our impactful spells, the ones that we want to play. And that's really kind of all it's there for. Coming back as a 4/4 is great. It's a great reanimate target for Scarab God, as is Hostage Taker and Ravenous Chupacabra. And that's the other reason that I want to do this. I'm not just playing these creatures because I like treasure tokens. I'm playing these because they're ramp cards that are also creatures, and so when they end up in my graveyard, either because they've traded with the opponent, or the opponent's had to use a removal spell on them, or because we've milled them with Champion of Wits, then we get to bring them back with Scarab God as 4/4s. So we get to play a ramp deck where our ramp cards are cards that we want to... where our ramp cards are the cards that we want to bring back with Scarab God. They're creatures. Maybe not want to bring back with Scarab God, but they get to be creatures, which is great. Cards that we do want to bring back with Scarab God are cards like the Champion of Wits, like we said before, or these two, the Ravenous Chupacabra or the Hostage Taker. I don't know which one of these is better. Hostage Taker hits more things, but it's a little risky. If our opponent has a removal spell for the Hostage Taker, it doesn't really do anything. And in fact, one of the better things to take with Hostage Taker are the cards with the good enters the battlefield effects. And if we take it with Hostage Taker and they answer it right away, then they get their enter the battlefield effect again. And we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot and paid 4 mana for the privilege to do it. But it does answer more things. And when you're ramping like this, it's more often the case that you'll be able to use Hostage Taker to take a meaningful 3 or 4 drop and immediately cast it. That's less possible with some of the other Grixis builds, so I'm excited to see that Hostage Taker in this list. And then we have Ravenous Chupacabra, which is like a Hostage Taker but lower risk. So lower risk, lower reward. It can't hit anything that's indestructible, and it doesn't answer Phoenix. But it is just a good 2-for-1, especially since Ravenous Chupacabra, when brought back by the Scarab God, is just really good. For removal, we have 3 copies of Fatal Push and 2 copies of Moment of Craving. These are to help fend off the early aggressive decks and give us some kind of a buffer for our life total. Then we also have Bontu's Last Reckoning, which acts as a sweeper. It's mostly there for the Winding Constrictor decks. Those decks very often get to be above Moment of Craving, and they have cards like Blossoming Defense to protect against either Fatal Pushes or Vraska's Contempt. So Bontu's Last Reckoning gives us an option to do that. And it's kind of counterintuitive that you'd want to be playing a Bontu's Last Reckoning when you have all these lands. I actually think Bontu's Last Reckoning is a bad card. I would gladly play like a 4-mana or 5-mana Wrath, but we can't really make double white for Fumigate, so we're going to play this one instead. To mitigate it a little bit, we still have the treasure tokens, from Direfleet Hoarders or Sailor of Means. And if you play a couple of Direfleet Hoarders and then they die due to a Bontu's Last Reckoning, you can still hold up something like Essence Scatter. And depending on how early you cast it, you might even be able to hold up a Vraska's Contempt or a Fatal Push for their follow-up play. So it's not terrible, but it's certainly not my favorite card. And then we have the full playset of Vraska's Contempt in order to answer things like Hazoret or opposing Scarab Gods or stuff like that. Let me go ahead and get this deck ordered. Let's see, how many Scarab Gods do I own? I own 2, so I don't need to rent 2, which is good because it's less money off of my rental. I don't think I own any of the other rares. Nope. Nope. Cool. So we'll rent this. The whole deck is about, including the Scarab Gods that I already own, the whole deck is around 350 in paper and around 100 and around 200 in on Moto in tickets. But so it's not a budget deck. Like, you're playing 3 Scarab Gods, you're playing a couple of copies of Vraska. Oh, that's right. They were hiding. These cards are also important to the deck. Let's pull those back over here. Spring to Mind is kind of begrudgingly being played. It's a 3-mana ramp spell, so it gets us to the 5 mana for the Hour of Promise. But it's a late game mana sink that lets us kind of get back into a game if we've flooded out a bit. And then also we can mill it with Champion of Wits in order to effectively draw a card, draw the mind half of the card if we don't need the ramp. The Vraskas are they're just really good. The -3 is a good catch-all. It destroys any artifact, creature, enchantment. The fact that it makes a treasure token is more cute than anything else, but it comes up sometimes. Typically, if you play a Vraska, minus it, destroy something, and then hold up a Fatal Push for the follow-up play, you're doing okay. Or if you have 7 mana, holding up an Essence Scatter for the follow-up play is usually good. And then its plus makes a good blocker, but it also makes a creature that doesn't really cost you a card, right? Because it's a +2 ability. So the Vraska's her plus ability is really good at protecting the card as it ticks up. If they have anything with more than 2 power, you kind of just jump block it, and that allows you to get ahead on the race for her ultimate, which is a good place to be. I mean, having a Planeswalker marching up consistently, even if they have a way to keep you from ultimating right away, let's say they're pushing through 1 or 2 points, the fact that the permanent is always there, giving you advantage even without any mana into it is great. I mean, that's the reason why we would play Planeswalkers. Another card you could play there would be like Liliana, Death's Majesty, but I've stuck with just the Vraskas at this point because I like the versatility of the minus ability to destroy troublesome permanents. Speaking of that, we'll go ahead and look at the sideboard real fast before we jump in. We've got a couple of cards here designed for the control matchups. Oops, let me pull those out right now. Yeah, and I guess Deathgorge Scavengers are kind of like the mid-range sort of thing. So we've got these 7 cards up here, the 3 negates, the 2 Duresses, and then these 2 enchantments. Duress and negate, obviously good in control matchups, but for these enchantments, Arguel's Bloodfast is a better card than I thought it was. Being able to trade life when it doesn't matter for cards is obviously very, very strong. The excess mana that this deck makes it pretty reasonable to play. If it ever transforms, we can minus our 4/4s that we're making with Scarab God in order to gain some life. And then we can also use the backside of this. The backside, by the way, is Temple of Alclazotz. It lets you tap and sacrifice a creature to gain life equal to the creature's toughness. So we can use that to protect our Scarab God if they point any kind of exile-based removal at it. So if they play a Vraska's Contempt or a Ixalan's Binding or something along those lines, we can use the Scarab God to, or we can use Arguel's Bloodfast to sacrifice our Scarab God and get its trigger. You can't see it in the reminder text because this card has too many lines, but when it dies, you return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So when we sacrifice it to Bloodfast, it just comes back on the end step, and we don't lose our Scarab God, which is good. Search for Azcanta, just obviously a very strong card. It might be worse in this deck because we are running quite a number of creatures. We've got 4. Here's another 7. So that's 11, 12, 13. And then the 3 Scarab Gods. So we've got 16 cards and then 16 creatures and 25 lands. Which is like 31 cards for the backside. But what we really want it for is kind of the front, where we get to mill creatures into our graveyard for the Scarab God to reanimate, or for stuff like Champion of Wits to be what's the word? Eternalized? Yeah, eternalized. Or for Spring to Mind. So these are both good cards. They're 2-mana enchantments that if you resolve them, kind of take the game away. Then we have, we'll go with our anti-aggro cards. We have another Moment of Craving, and then 2 more Bontu's Last Reckonings. I'm not sure that I'll ever go up to the 3rd Bontu's Last Reckoning, but I kind of want it in against the snake decks, so we're gonna try that out. I think it'll be capable there. The Moment of Craving is another card for mono red or any of the aggro decks. And then we have 2 Thrashing Brontodons for some of the tech cards. Some of the, if our opponents are playing Bloodfast or Search for Azcanta, we want to be able to answer those. And then the other thing I like about this is it's a 3-mana 3/4, which is already okay. Like it's not terrible, but it puts itself in the graveyard for Scarab God, so you can bring it back as a 4/4 and blap another enchantment if you need to, which is good. And then I've got these 3 dinosaurs. The Deathgorge Scavengers, kind of sitting between the middle. You know, these are our quality mid-range creatures. They function as good anti-Scarab God tech because we get to eat their creatures out of their graveyard, or even our creatures out of our graveyard if it looks like they're going to be able to use a Scarab God more reliably than we are. Against the aggro decks, we can bring it in order to gain some life, eating their removal spells after they've spent them on our Sailors or Direfleet Hoarders. It's just an all-around good card. The stats are a little meh, which is why I like leaving it in the sideboard. You don't really want to lean on this in game 1, when you kind of just want your deck to be doing its thing. But when you're trying to, it's a good like bottom of the curve card against control, where you get to slowly eat their graveyard, and it's a good top end against aggro, where you get to play a 3/2 that gains you some life, blocks, and then comes back as a 4/4 after you Scarab God. So that's generally where I'm at with the deck. The mana base is a little rough. I didn't spend a lot of time on it. I'm not 100% sure that the mix of deserts is correct. I think I want to add, real fast before we start this, I'm going to change out some of these Desert of the Mindfuls for a new Rivulet. Which means I'll have to rent them, but that'll be fast. I want to keep some number of Cycle Deserts, but these ones are untapped, and then they have a reasonable ability. It's it's good against a wide variety of cards, and it can just mill ourselves to put more creatures in the graveyard to up our Scarab God count. So let me rent those real fast. Alright, Ifnir Deadlands. And we wanted 2 of those. Rent. Should be pretty fast. But anyway, once I get those, I'm going to jump into a thing, so I'll go ahead and cut the video off now.